Aloha, my name is Tracy, and this is a video on damage over time. Damage over time is additional elemental damage done to a target when the elemental effect procs or activates. You shoot the target, you see initial damage numbers pop up, and then you see a different set of numbers bubble up for a few seconds. That second set is damage over time, and that effect is obvious and second nature once you start playing the game. However, there's a lot about damage over time and how it works that is not obvious or intuitive at first glance. At least it wasn't to me, hence this video. Now I'm going to cover 6 or 7 key concepts and then talk a little bit about what to do with this knowledge. If you want to skip ahead to a particular topic, the topic start times are listed on the right. Also, I'm going to mention cryo here and there, but cryo doesn't actually do damage over time. It slows and freezes. Okay? It is an element in the game and it has effects that accrue over time, just not direct damage. The first two concepts I cover regarding dot duration and how dot damage is applied, I cover together because each one helps you understand the other. Dot duration is element specific and it's actually listed on the stat cards. If you look at the stat card for any gun, look at the element tab, it tells you right there, fire lasts 5 seconds. And in this case, radiation lasts 8 seconds. Okay, so fire and cryo are actually 5 seconds, corrosion is 7, shock is 3, and radiation is 8. Two of these are actually incorrect in terms of what's on the card. Shock actually lasts 3 seconds, and corrosion actually lasts 7. Now I'm guessing Gearbox changed the effects during development and it just hasn't gotten around to fixing the cards. In any case, damage is actually applied 3 times per second, not one time, which is why the damage numbers you see bubbling up never seem to match what's on the card. Take this listed number right here, 1506. Adjust for element versus target type. I'm going to be using fire on an armor target here in normal mode. That's minus 30%. 30% from 1506 leaves 1054. Then divide that by 3, you get 351. Now note that the number there, or the numbers coming up, are not exactly 351, but it actually varies. I don't know why that is. It just is, regardless of the source. The numbers vary by no more than about 5%. If anyone knows why this happens, drop me a comment. In any case, the numbers are consistently right where they should be. Also, if you count the number of damage figures that tick up and divide by 3, you get the dot duration. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. I just started earlier there? Maybe proc twice, but 15 divided by 3 is 5 seconds. I also mentioned that shock was actually 3 seconds, not 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think I procced it twice there. It keeps doing this to me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, there we go. And then corrosion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Divided by 3 is 7 seconds. Next concept is that damage over time of one element from one source type, meaning a gun, any gun in this instance, does not stack. You can activate or proc an elemental damage over time effect on a target repeatedly, even if one is already in place, but subsequent procs will not stack damage on top of each other. They will simply replace the existing dot and extend the dot's duration. The damage applied remains constant. Now to help illustrate this, I've spec'd 1 point into Violent Tapestry. This is a tier 1 skill that grants a stack of rush every time the siren here procs a status effect. Now rush stacks are visible at the bottom of the screen as a little winged foot icon. There's one right there. If there's more than one stack, there's a multiplier. Okay. So what this means is I can visually know exactly how many times I proc the status effect while playing, even if a dot effect is already in progress, and you will see it too. So what I'm going to do here is fire continuously at the target until a dot procs. Numbers start bubbling up and the rush stack icon appears. And then I'm going to keep firing until at least one additional rush stack is indicated by a multiplier next to the icon. Watch the damage over time numbers bubbling up as I do this. Now you notice that while there were more than one dot proc during the firing period, in fact 3 of them, and there was no break in the dot numbers, the number values stayed the same. They did not double or triple as you would expect if the damage was stacked. Dot of one element, damage over time of one element from one source, does not stack. This diagram here better illustrates what happens. Okay, the yellow line going left to right represents gunfire over time, with each dot representing one shot. Now the listed rate of fire here is 6.95 rounds per second. Guardian rank may bring it up to 7.2, but let's just call it 7 rounds per second. Okay, so you have each one of those numbers is 1 second. Let's say I start firing, and the 6th round procs a dot. That dot will last 5 seconds, but I keep firing, and the 14th round procs another dot. Does that mean the damage is stacked where the 2 dot ranges overlap? No, we just saw that that is in fact not what happens. What happens is the second dot resets or extends the duration of the dot overall. The damage per second remains constant, but the duration is extended. And as long as you continue to proc, and the enemy hasn't died, you can do this indefinitely. Also, if you proc often enough, damage over time can be maintained even through reload periods, so long as your reload period is shorter than the dot duration. Okay, this mechanic whereby a subsequent dot overrides or replaces an existing one of the same element applies even if the size of the dot, the damage level, differs. If you switch guns with 2 different damage over time damage levels, or if you're playing a Marauder or Spec into Infusion, this can be important. Okay, there may be other scenarios where this happens. As an example, if you have a dot in place that's doing 60 damage per second, and you introduce another dot on top of that that does 100, the 100 damage per second will override the smaller one. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate that here with radiation, because with an 8-second dot, it should be obvious when the second dot overrides the first. And hopefully these things will proc properly, because it's been a pain in testing here. Okay, here we go. There we go. Now as you can see, the larger dot overrode the smaller one almost immediately, and that's a good thing. You want that to happen. The reverse, however, is also true for the most part. A smaller dot will replace a larger dot already in place. And let me see if I can't demonstrate that by reloading these guns first, because I'll tell you right now I'm having problems during testing here and recording to get this thing to happen correctly. Okay, this is the big dot gun. No, let's make sure. Okay, that's 60, that's 100. So I'm going to do 100 first, and then I'm going to do 60. There we go. She procced. She procced twice. The smaller one overrode the larger one. Okay, now I say for the most part though, because I did discover in testing that if 2 dot damage levels are drastically different, a smaller dot will not override a larger one. As a matter of fact, when I looked at the rush stacks as an indicator, the smaller dot would not even proc. Okay, and I'm going to try and demonstrate that with these two here using fire. This guy has an 87% damage per second rating. It's only level 18. This one is 1506. So I'm going to fire this guy first and this guy second. And I'll just show you that it never even procs. This is the big guy. Fire. Little guy. Also fire. Nothing doing. And I have tested this over and over and over, so take my word for it that, you know, if there's a big enough difference, the second one doesn't even proc. Okay. I mean, the rush stack numbers don't even change. I have tested this repeated. Now, this too is a good thing. I can't think of any example, accidental or otherwise, where you would want a really small dot turn in for a really big one already in place. Now, I don't know what the exact threshold is for this mechanic to take effect, but it's somewhere between 25 and 50%. The second dot is somewhere south of 50%, the game won't even recognize it. Again, that's a good thing. And when I figure out the exact number, I will let you know. Everything I've covered so far deals with damage over time of a single element from a single source type. But you could have damage over time of the same element from different source types going simultaneously. Grenade is different from a gun, both of which are different from a dot conferred by an artifact. These things can and do stack. I'm going to show you a video here where I procced damage over time from an artifact by sliding, followed by a grenade and then a gun. All these are fire element, all are different damage numbers, and all are stacking. The slide will produce damage over time numbers of 12 to 13, the grenade around 6 to 7, and the gun in the low 20s. Now, it took a number of tries to get this effect to happen on video, by the way. So if it's not obvious, back up the video and go frame by frame. There you go. Now, I have no idea if action skill dots or other gear-induced dots can stack this even more, although I'm pretty sure they can. And I have no idea what governs the size of a dot or the chance to proc a dot for those types of sources. Okay, I mostly play Amara, so I'm going to look into the action skill aspect of it. In any case, damage over time can and does stack in this manner. And in fact, I would love to see someone stack 4 or 5 dots of the same element on one target on video. Wonder what the world record is. This one's a no-brainer, but I'd be remiss if I left it out. Obviously, you can have different elemental dots going at the same time. I've seen at least one build that has all 5 elements in play at once, although I don't think they highlighted damage over time as a plus to that. I'm going to try and get 4 going. I should be able to get at least 3 going here. I'm going to do radiation, corrosion, do a grenade, which has a high proc chance of incendiary, and do shot glass. So I start longest duration to shortest. Let's see if this works. I know what I'm doing here. Yeah, I think I got them all going at the same time. Chance to proc damage over time is per projectile. What does this mean and why is it important? Okay, take this shotgun. It has a listed proc chance of 6%, which is not very high. A 6% chance is 1 in 17. That means that if the proc chance was per shot, then on average, and that's a term I use a lot, every 17th shot will proc damage over time. Okay, on average. But take a look. Now I want to fire this guy about 20 times, and I'll count off as I go, and we'll note the proc chance, the actual proc dots on the bottom and the rush stacks. Okay, I'll edit it together so you don't have to sit here and wait while I do this, but watch what happens. 3, 4, 13, 14, 15, 16, 19, 20. Okay, that was 4 procs and 20 shots. Now there were a lot of streaks in there because it's random number generation, okay? But 4 and 20 is not 6%. 4 and 20 is not 1 in 17. Okay, why is that? Because the chance is per projectile, and because I'm hitting with every projectile every time, the random number generator runs its routine not once, but 8 times with each shot. This means that the actual proc chance on average, what I'm calling the effective proc chance, is 8 times 6%, or roughly 48%, and that's a big deal. Okay, anytime you have a gun that fires multiple projectiles per shot, the effective proc chance is actually higher than you might think based on the stat card. This also applies to guns with unlisted projectiles like the Lyuda or Star Helix. Now, how do I know this for sure? Well, I tested several weapons, firing them repeatedly and recording the number of times I procced a shot. I started with the Wester gun that fired single rounds per shot. I fired it 250 times. A dot procced 47 times. That's a rate of 18.8%. The listed chance is 19%, so that's exactly where it should be. That was my control. Then I tested a number of other weapons. Okay, an assault rifle, another SMG, and 4 different shotguns, including the one I showed you, all of which fired multiple projectiles per shot. Test results are on this table. Now the 2 beige colored columns are the listed proc chance and the observed proc frequency per projectile. And these pretty much match up. The chance to proc a dot was consistently observed to be per projectile. But if you look at the numbers in the yellow column showing dot percentage per shot, however, except for the vanilla Western gun, they are proportionally higher, said proportion being roughly the number of projectiles. So the rule of thumb is, whenever your gun fires multiple projectiles, multiply the proc chance by the number of projectiles to get a more accurate measure of the weapon's dot proc chance. Okay, although again, this is on average. Okay, we're dealing with probability here. However, also remember that the result assumes you hit with all projectiles. Not always easy to do when the target shoots back and won't stand still. Just keep that in mind. And just an FYI for anyone paying attention, I did use Violent Tapestry and rush stacks to aid in counting dots during the testing. Okay, rush stacks are consumed when I activate my action skill, granting an increased chance to proc a status effect. That's what Violent Tapestry does. So during testing, I periodically activated my action skill to clear out the rush stacks. Okay, and then I waited at least 20 seconds, because that's Violent Tapestry's duration, before continuing testing. That way, the proc chance for any given weapon would not be affected by Violent Tapestry. So my test results were not skewed. Following on the heels of the last topic, when considering how effective a gun is at proccing damage over time, you also need to look at the rate of fire. Remember that the random number generator checks to see if you proc a dot every time you hit an enemy. That means a gun with a sufficiently high rate of fire has more chances to proc a dot than a slower firing gun in a given amount of time. A high rate of fire can actually compensate for a seemingly low percentage chance to proc dot. Take the Western gun again. Okay, this guy has a 19% chance per round. That's about 1 in 5, meaning every 5th round will proc a dot on average. But the rate of fire is 6.95 rounds per second. So if every 5th round procs on average, that's more than once per second. The goal is to get damage over time to proc as soon as possible and as often as possible. And you can do that with the multiple projectiles per shot, but you can also do it by firing a whole lot of shots in a small amount of time. Look at that, that was 6 procs in, I don't know, 4 seconds? Something like that. Okay. All you have to do is multiply the rate of fire by the effective percentage chance to get a good idea of how often you will proc per second. Now call this the effective proc rate. Anytime you get a number above 1, and especially if it's well over 1, you're doing pretty good. Okay. Going back to the table, notice that I've calculated effective proc rate on the far right. The Western gun actually fares pretty well, and the binary Western gun and the COV assault rifle do really well. Be careful though when doing this. Proccing early and often due to the rate of fire assumes a fairly continuous rate of fire. Small magazines and or long reload times can seriously decrease the effective proc rate. That shotgun with the 6% listed chance but the effective chance of around 48%, it only holds 2 rounds and fires both of them at once. The effective proc rate is lower than just doing the math. You spend a lot more time reloading than firing. Still, the reload's pretty fast, and with the chance to proc roughly every other shot, that's not bad. Okay. Now, this is kind of a balancing act at time. It all depends, but the main thing is, if you got a good proc chance, you don't need as high a proc rate, and vice versa. If the effective proc chance is high enough, the effective proc rate may not be as important. And if the effective proc rate is high enough, because it's a really fast firing gun, the effective proc chance doesn't need to be as high either. What makes an item good at doing damage over time boils down to 2 things. 1, the ability to proc a dot early and often, which are basically the same thing. And 2, the actual size of the dot, the damage per second. And it turns out these 2 things are on the stat card. Okay, the first one may take a little bit of work to decipher, but we just learned how that works. Okay, proccing early and often means a high effective proc rate or a high effective proc chance, or both. And until you actually proc damage over time, the size of the damage is irrelevant. Once it does proc, however, you want the biggest damage figure you can get. Because if the dot damage isn't big enough to help you, doesn't matter how easy it is to get it to proc. Now, how big is big enough? What's the dividing line between too little and enough? Well, that's up to you. But there's also a bunch of other factors that can come into play. I mentioned magazine size and reload speed already. Remember that shotgun? Okay, but accuracy and handling can also be critical. All the numbers I've run past you again assume you hit with all projectiles. If a weapon's accuracy and or handling is so poor that a good portion of projectiles don't actually land, well, you can figure that one out. There are also guns whose value lies in special abilities regardless of dot potential. Some of the best guns in the game don't do damage over time very well. Okay, some character skills obviously boost dot proc chance and or elemental dot damage. There are specific pieces of gear that do the same. There are all sorts of builds that can make a gun less stellar at dot perform better in that regard. This is Borderlands after all. Lots of moving parts and interactions. Nothing does its best work in isolation. That's the fun of the game. Okay, damage over time is just one tool, one trait to consider when deciding what to equip. So that's it. I still have a bunch of questions, some of which I know the answer to and some I don't. Okay, there's a lot of potential mechanics involving damage over time and other gear and skills, and characters I haven't even really played yet. And I'll probably end up doing a part 2 at some point to get all that in, but that's a lot of research and experience that's down the road. Now, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, let me know. Let me know if you learned something. If I got something wrong, let me know that too so I can address it. Thanks for listening.